Good afternoon and welcome. I'm David Feist, and I will be the facilitator of this webinar day. Our presenters are Paul Matera and Keith Mowry. Thank you for joining ANAB for our complimentary webinar on the revision of ISO IEC 17020-2012 status update. Please note we are recording this webinar, so it will be available for viewing in the future. Some logistics before we get started. Due to the high attendance, everyone will remain muted for the duration of the webinar. Please enter your questions into the Q&A box. We have a planned time at the end of the webinar to answer any questions which are asked. Let me tell you a little bit about the presenters. Paul Matera is an ANAB Senior Accreditation Manager, and he heads up our inspection body program. He's also on the ISO CASCO Working Group 31, which is revising 17020. He is currently serving as the chair of the task group on risk for this working group and represents ANAB with ILAC on the inspection committee, as well as other inspection committees for regional cooperation bodies worldwide. He has over 30 years in the inspection field. Now about Keith Mowry. Keith Mowry is our Senior Manager for Business Development at ANAB. He is our representative to the ANSI International Conformity Assessment Committee, which is a mirror committee to ISO CASCO. He served as the chair for this for over 20 years and has over 30 years experience with ISO standards and guides for conformity assessment. I'd like you to join me in welcoming these two fine gentlemen. Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much, David. This is Keith, and I just want to spend a couple of minutes giving some background on how a standard like 17020 gets revised. Of course, all standards in ISO are under the responsibility of a particular committee. Usually that's a technical committee in ISO, like ISO TC 87 for cork. Yes, apparently there's a technical committee for cork. Now the ISO 17020 and the other standards related to conformity assessment that ISO publishes are under the responsibility of ISO CASCO, and CASCO is the ISO Committee on Conformity Assessment. It's a real live committee. It's not a TC. It doesn't have a TC or a number, but it performs that same function for these standards. Now, the ISO directives, of course, are the rules for developing and maintaining ISO standards. And these rules apply to the ISO 17000 series standards like 17020, just like they do to all the other ISO standards. One of those rules in the directives is that a standard that is not revised after 5 years undergoes a mandatory systematic review. Now, a systematic review is really nothing more than a ballot to the responsible committee offering options of what to do with the standard. And the three options are to confirm the standard, which means keep it going with no changes, revise or amend the standard, or withdraw the standard. Now, a second rule in the directives is that at any time in between these systematic reviews, the responsible committee can pass a resolution to revise a standard. So if we go to the next slide, we see that, of course, participation in ISO CASCO. Let's see if I can go to the next slide here. Nope. David, can you help me out by going to the next slide? There we go. So participation in ISO is by individual country, and in each country there is a member body. There's an organization that serves as the member body to ISO. And here in the United States, the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI, is the US member body to ISO. Now, under ANSI rules, there are individual committees formed to interact and provide input to individual ISO technical committees. And these are called U.S. Technical Advisory Groups, or TAGs. For ISO CASCO, the ANSI International Conformity Assessment Committee is the U.S. tag to ISO CASCO. Now, within CASCO itself, these national committees are sometimes referred to as national mirror committees. So sometimes you'll hear the ANSI ICAC referred to as the National Mirror Committee to CASCO or the U.S. Tagged Committee to CASCO. It all means the same thing. There's just the one committee, and that's the role that the ICAC plays. Now, if you're interested in ANSI ICAC, perhaps getting involved, perhaps becoming a member, it's really easy. You just do an ANSI ICAC internet search, and you will find all the information you need. So if we can go to the next slide. So 17020 was published in 2012, and that was actually a revision of the first edition of 17020, which was published in 1998. Preceding 17020, ISO published Guide 39, both initially in 1983 and as a revision in 1988. So ISO has been developing a standard or a guide for inspection bodies for really quite a long time. Now, between 2012 and 2017, there was no proposal to revise 17020. So there was a systematic review ballot in 2017, and the ISO CASCO member bodies voted to confirm 17020 at that time. Let's keep going, no changes. Between 2017 and 2022, there were also no proposals to revise 17020, so there was another systematic review done in 2022. This time, the CASCO members voted to open up that document for a revision. Now, based on the comments that were submitted, it wasn't so much that there was a particular problem with the standard. It was, I think, more that the CASCO members felt like, okay, it's 10 years old. Certainly we should just open it up and take a look and see if there's anything that needs to be changed. And that's really something very common that you find in ISO CASCO. When a document hits that 10-year mark, it's very common that the systematic review results in it getting opened up for revision. So if we go to the next slide, I just want to talk through a little bit about the voting results from that systematic review. 63% of the voting members at ISO CASCO, 75 members within CASCO actually voted on that systematic review, and 48 of them voted to revise the standard, 27 voted to confirm. Now, the interesting thing is that there were a substantial number of CASCO members that didn't vote at all. And that was a little surprising to me, because I think inspection, if it's not the most widely practiced conformity assessment activity, it's certainly one of them. And it really goes way, way back in history as an activity in general. So to think that a fair chunk of CASCO member bodies had no opinion whatsoever on whether a document for inspection bodies should be revised or not, that was a little surprising. Well, if we go to the next slide, after that systematic review was completed, ISO CASCO set up Working Group 31 and asked for experts from all the CASCO member countries to participate in the revision of 17020. There's a rule in ISO CASCO that only 3 individuals from each country can participate in a working group. And Paul Matera from ANAB was named as one of the 3 experts from the United States to participate on this working group to revise 17020. And I'm going to turn it over to Paul now, and he will talk you through some of the more interesting issues and questions that are currently under consideration in that revision process. So take it away, Paul. Paul, if you're on mute, I don't think we can hear you.
I was on mute. Sorry. So I will take you guys to the next few slides here. So basically, the key issues what I'll go over is just a summary of some of the key issues that we faced and some of the proposed changes. So something to keep in mind throughout this presentation, all of the things that I'm going to show you are, for the most part, they're still to be debated and decided on. We have some votes coming up where we will wordsmith some more of this stuff, and it will go to final votes later on down in the process. So just keep in mind, everything that I'm showing you now is what we're discussing. It is not necessarily what's going to end up in the final published document. So one of the things that we have to talk about is that the required information that's supposed to be in all ISO 17000 standards, they are called the Proc 33 common elements. And so what we had to do with those is the last update for Proc 33 came out after the publication of ISO 17020-2012. So all the new information, all the new required text that's in the new Proc 33 is not in the current standard for 17020. So that's one of the first things that we had to do. And you'll see on the screen that affects clauses on impartiality, confidentiality, competence, impartiality, and confidentiality in 6.1, 7.5, 7.6, 1. So when you do finally see the new standard come out, the Proc 33 common elements have been put into those sections. Let's see here. Let's start with, I'm going to go through the major clauses just one by one and just give you an idea of what some of the updates were. So the definitions were some of the first things that we worked on, because without proper definitions, you can't really create a standard that makes sense and has continuity throughout. So specifically, we wanted to align the new document with the requirements of ISO 17000-2020. And again, 2020 came out after the 2012 current version, so there was a lot of updating we had to do in that regard. Specifically, this impacts the definitions of inspection, inspection systems, schemes, partiality, and appeals, and things like that. We removed definitions for product, process, and service. We added definitions for client item and independence. So some of the revised terms, inspection is one of them. All right, inspection is one of them. So before we had product, process, and service, we took that to more of a general item or object. We retain the definition of inspection for the most part, but it might not include a determination of conformity anymore. So let's see here. So the notes to entry on the new definition, and I'm looking at it right now, it's the delay. It includes inspection of processes, and it can include personnel, facilities, technology, and methodology, and so forth, but it may not necessarily include a determination of conformity. You can inspect something and just for information and not have to determine whether or not something's in conformance or not. Inspection system and inspection scheme now align more closely with ISO 17000 and now refers to item, as in item inspected. Specifically, the new text that's, yes, David, no, I'm on 12. The set of rules and procedures that describes the items inspected or object of inspection identifies the specified requirements and provides the methodology for performing the inspection. So then there's some notes to entry on that try to help shore that up. All right, so we revised the terms on impartiality and appeal. Again, we align these with 17,000. Okay, I'm on, David, I'm on slide 13. So the we aligned impartiality and appeal with 17,000, and it now relates to the outcome of the inspection. And we removed, one of the big things is we removed the references to independence within the definitions, within the definition of impartiality. We've now split that out. So impartiality is got its own definition, and then we created a definition for independence, which I'll get to on the next slide. The appeal now ties to the decision, and its inclusion within the definitions is still an open question. We're still debating that a little bit on what we're going to do with that. Next slide, David. We proposed a new term, client. Opens up the concept of who is considered the client. This does also tie back to who is eligible to lodge an appeal. We felt that that needed to be narrowed in, so the lab or the inspection body, an appeal can only come from a client, basically. The new definition, the new proposed definition for appeal is a request by the client to an inspection body for reconsideration by that body of a decision. It's made relating to the conformity of that item. So then the question is, well, who's the client? Who can make an appeal? So we with that updated appeal, we needed to create a definition for client, which is a person or organization requesting inspection of an item. So again, the notes, there's a note to entry, the client may not be responsible for providing the item. So again, this is all still being voted on and decided on. An item is anything that can be inspected. That then begs the question of, well, whole population of what you inspected or just specifically what you looked at, right? If you, Keith likes to use the bicycle tire example. If I inspect 300 bicycle tires, and of that 300, I select 30 to actually look at, and can I say I inspected the entire lot or just the 30 I looked at? So that's some of the things that we're wrestling with right now as well. Independence, again, 17,000 relates to a person or organization. Applicability to item, as in item relative to the independence, is still an open question. The key here is going to be to think about the difference between impartiality and independence as two separate concepts. All inspection bodies are expected to be impartial. Not all inspection bodies have the same levels of independence. So then the terms and conditions or terms and definitions, we're still considering subcontracting, outsourcing. What does that mean specifically relative to inspection bodies? Competence, validation, verification, and professional judgment. Had a lot of discussions over professional judgment. What is a professional? Regarding licensure versus I get paid to do this. That means I'm a professional. How does that play into the inspection body and who their personnel are and how they come to their decisions? So there's a lot of discussion on that. I just came back from an ILAC P15 meeting last week in Montreal, and in the inspection committee meeting there, we had a lot of the same discussions. So that's a big question. So we may see some changes there. Next slide. All right, clause 4. So clause 4 is where we had, we had the impartiality and, let's see, I'm trying to get to that. It used to be impartiality and independence. And so for one, so we've removed the word independence. That is one of the areas where we have updated Proc 33 required language, so there'll be a little bit different language in there. We essentially removed completely the current wording of 413. We replaced it with that additional information. We added in independence as well. So we separated the independence and impartiality concepts, disconnected them, and we've identified them separately. And then we took out the whole annex or the ABC type of independence in the body of the standard, and we moved it, or we expanded it down in Annex A. So there's a lot more information in the future Annex A about type A, type B, type C. That question, though, is still being debated on. Some members wanted to eliminate it all the way. Other members felt it was really needed because the market has come to rely on that. There was a lot of discussion back and forth on what to do with it. There have also been some discussions on maybe eliminating one of the categories, and then another set of discussions about adding a category, making 4 of them, type D. So currently what's out there for ballot right now still has ABC in it, with a lot of extra notes in the annex on what it means to be an A versus a B versus a C, and some more examples. Okay, next slide. All right, so clause 5, structural requirements. We changed it because a lot of the comments we were getting back from the ISO members that were originally surveyed on the standard was clarity and applicability to global inspection bodies. So one of the changes is to drop the deputy technical manager, and then updated the requirements for what a technical manager is. Let's see here. So there'll be no more requirement currently as proposed for a deputy technical manager. We'll still need a technical manager, but they will not need a deputy. Okay, next slide. There's a lot more examples and notes throughout clause 5 now. We try to provide additional clarification for what a given clause means. And so we've done that through notes. So for many of you on the call, you're probably familiar with ILAC P15. And ILAC P15 was a companion document to ISO 17020 in that it provided additional clarification and explanation for a lot of the requirements within 17020. So one of the goals was to take ILAC P15 as much as possible and integrate it into the new standard, because those clarifications were very well thought out. They made sense. And for most accreditation bodies, if you get accredited to ISO 17020, ILAC P15 is also a requirement. So we tried to bring those into the actual standard. We have added clarity for organizational structure. And then there's new clauses now for operational control. So think of large multi-site inspection bodies with 45 or 50 offices, even some with 10 offices. Sometimes the requirements of the quality management system, which are the basis of their accreditation, don't quite make it out to all of the branch offices all over the world. And so there's been an effort to help within the standard provide some clarity to what the expectation is there in those situations. And a lot of that information is drawn from ISO 17020. Next slide. All right, resource requirements in section 6. So this had its own task group as well, and they came up with quite a few things. Again, Proc 33 requirements are now integrated into this section, which is primarily personnel. And then we wanted to align it a little bit more with the requirements of ISO 17025. For inspection bodies that also have other ISO standards, there was a concerted effort also to try to help align the standards as much as possible. There are some obviously stark differences between a test lab and an inspection body, but there's some things that could be aligned. And so what we tried to do is, where it made sense, try to align those. That way, companies that have dual standards don't have to have dual sets of rules that in some cases contradict each other or are just not compatible. So we try to align that as much as possible. So one of those is around competencies, blending Proc 33 boilerplate with existing text. That really helped align it. Documented information demonstrating competence of personnel is something that we focused on. Facilities and equipment. So there's been a long-standing debate about, I'm an inspection body, I don't really use that much equipment, and what I do, whatever I do use, I don't necessarily need to have it calibrated or traceable. And the current standard was a little soft on that. So there's been an effort to bring more of the language in line with 2.5. To be clear, any piece of equipment that was used in a conformity decision always needed to be traceable and to one degree or another. This new language brings it more into line with 17025. Next slide. All right, externally provided resources are another key issue that we've been talking about. Again, here we tried to align it a little bit more like 17025 and blending some of the current 2.0 language with some of the 2.5 content where appropriate. So you'll see that throughout the new standard once it's published, so you'll see some of those alignments. There's a new note in 631. It clearly states that the IB must be competent to perform a scope item itself. Not to expect to list items on a scope they plan on subcontracting out completely. So we run into this quite a bit. You go into an inspection body and they personally, the people in the inspection body aren't necessarily competent to perform a given inspection. And we get told, well, we're going to sub the whole thing out. Well, that was never really allowed, but it wasn't as explicit in the standard, the current version of standard, as it should have been. So there's a note in, we added to 631 that says, by definition, in ISO 1711 clause 3.1, accreditation is limited to conformity assessment tasks which the inspection body has demonstrated competence to perform itself. The task of assessing and interpreting the results of such activities for the purpose of determining conformity may be included in the scope of accreditation, provided adequate competence for this has been demonstrated. So we hope that will help clear up some things that have been an issue in the past. Next slide, please. All right, section 7, process requirements. This is around inspections, methods, and procedures. So again, Proc 33 got involved here, so updated some of the language, and contract and work order control clarity has been a part of this as well. So I've got a couple things on the slide here. 715, clarity regarding acceptance and monitoring of the performance of work. So we had a lot of information around, contract review and things like that, but there was not a lot of language about, okay, you have the project now. Does anyone monitor the performance of the work during the whole project? And not just the performance of who you're inspecting, but the performance of the inspection body to stay within, the lines of what they're supposed to be doing. So we added some clarity about that in 715. Basically rewrote that whole clause. 7.2 and 7.3, so references to the items themselves. So like 7.2.2, the inspection body shall establish whether the items to be inspected has been prepared. We added for the intended inspection activities. So that adds a little bit of clarity to that. And then again, the entire population of what we're looking at or samples inspected, there's still a bit of a discussion around that. Let's see here, equipment and conditions now need to be in the records. So for those of you that also run 17025, you'll know that you know, the inspection reporting is required to, or at least in the records somewhere, you're supposed to have an identification of the equipment, basically traceability if you have to rerun the test. And so those same concepts are coming over into 17020 in that if there is equipment that's used that is used as part of your conformity decision, you should indicate what that equipment is. So put that in the record somewhere. It doesn't say it has to be in the report, but just somewhere in the records. And complaints and appeals were separated out as two different concepts. If you remember earlier, we talked about the definitions and how they were separated out. Appeals was updated and so forth. So in the new standard, 7.5 will be appeals, and then we've rewritten that section. And then 7.6 would be complaints, and that's a whole new section. And so we tried to separate those out and make those a lot more clear, easier to understand. All right, clause 8. Again, Proc 33, there was a lot of new information there that had to be put in there. And content from the other standards. Again, we're trying to align standards the best we can so people that have multiple standards are able to not have to have multiple quality manuals. So option A or option B, as far as the type of inspection body you are, so that was up in 8.1. That's now been dropped. ISO 9001 is still mentioned, which was the old option B, but it's still, you still have to meet the requirements of ISO 17020, even if you carry a current ISO 9001 certificate. And so the expectation is going to be you'll still need to provide objective evidence that you comply with all the requirements of Clause 8. And so the section here was just realigned, rewritten to make that a little bit more clear. Text for risks, opportunities, and improvement were brought in from other 17,000 standards. Again, in trying to align these. And then preventative actions was deleted. So we don't have that in there anymore. Next slide. All right, and when we get down to Annex A, let's see here. Trying to give you some specifics out there. Okay, so on Annex A, the whole ABC created some confusion and some issues for a lot of people. Some people felt that Type B and Type C inspection bodies were being cast as lesser inspection bodies. You know, they're not as good as the Type A. And what we tried to do is update those concepts, which is why we split out impartiality from independence. So whether you're a Type A, a Type B, or Type C, you are expected to be impartial, period. No argument there. If you're a Type B, you're an in-house lab to a manufacturer and you're inspecting your own company's stuff, that inspection is still intended to be impartial, just as impartial as if it was a third party. Now, the level of independence that that in-house lab has, that in-house inspection body has, is obviously different. They can't be as independent as, let's say, a type A, type C, because they just have a different relationship. That doesn't mean they can't be as impartial as everyone else. And so that's what we're trying to beef up here. And we hope that the market will see the reliance on impartiality and start to back off on some of those negative connotations that they're applying to non-type A inspection bodies. But again, that's still being debated, and some circles hotly debated. You have to remember that this work group is made up of, Keith probably has an exact number, but it's 40 or 50 people from all over the world, and they all have very different approaches. They have different markets, and they have different ways in which this standard is being applied within their markets. So they have different perspectives. The conversations, the debates, the arguments in some cases were very intelligent, very passionate, and very good, very eye-opening. So it's been a very rewarding experience for me personally. But what that means, though, is that we have to come to some sort of consensus on each of these items, which is why throughout this you've seen that we've said it's an open question. Okay, Keith, I believe you're going to take it from here.
Yeah, let me just add one item about the types ABC. I think the key change, and again, this is, as Paul has mentioned, this is a draft. These are very, very early stages. Actually, if you think about, when you make Jell-O, it starts off as a boiling liquid in the pot, and then it gets poured into the mold, and it kind of starts to thicken up, and eventually it takes on a form, right, where it can stand on its own. In that analogy, the revision to 17020 is still the boiling liquid in the pot. I mean, that's how early we are, and that's how much things can change as things go on. But for types A, B, and C, right now, the way things stand now, in the current 17020, there are normative references to types A, B, and C in, I think it's clause 4.1.6 in 17020. And it says things like, if you do this kind of inspection, you shall meet the requirements of type A, and if you do this kind of inspection, you shall meet the requirements of type B, and that kind of stuff. The structure of the revised 17020 at this point, again, it's the runny liquid. It's not forming yet, but at this point, those ABC designations and the different requirements for different levels of independence don't come out of a normative reference in the body of the standard. Okay, so in effect, what they are three kinds of requirements for an inspection body to categorize itself if it so wishes. And this text itself, the draft text itself, says that an inspection body can be a type A inspection, have type A independence and meet type A independence requirements today for this kind of inspection. Tomorrow, on a completely different, inspection engagement, it could be a type B. And the day after that, on a completely different inspection engagement, it could be a type C. It also goes out of the way of saying, look, types A, B, and C are not the only kinds of independence that can exist. They happen to be the three kinds of independence that the market historically has been most interested in, and so 17020 provides those. So that's a really big shift, right? From kind of the way it's structured and it's worded today. And I know that is a big hot button issue for a lot of people who use 17020, and I'm sure it's something that everybody, that'll be like the first thing they flip open to when they see a draft revision of the standard being balloted. First thing they'll run to is Annex A and see how that's referenced in the body of the standard. And that's a good thing to do, because there's a lot of thought and discussion going on about that. Now, what I want to finish up with is kind of the $80,000 question is, great, when is the standard going to be revised? When is it going to get published? And of course, like everybody else, I'm going to say the same thing. Well, it depends, and that doesn't give you a lot to go on, and frankly, that's not real helpful. So what I want to do right on this slide is I want to walk through hypothetically, the fastest possible scenario based on my experience with these standards. What's the fastest possible scenario where this standard would be published and we could get a look at the final published version? And I'm going to walk you through that. So the first starting point is what's going on with the working group that Paul's a member of. And right now they are putting together their thoughts on a very, very early working draft of the revised standard. And that's, like I said, that's like the liquid jello in the pot. Almost anything can happen in terms of what kind of shape that thing takes before it gets finished. The next meeting of the working group is, I think, the middle or end of February of 2024. So between now and February, the working group members, like Paul, are looking and thinking and drafting and providing comments, and that's all going to get put together, and the working group meeting in February is going to consider all that input, and hopefully, I think the goal there would be to come up with a first draft of the revision that could be balloted outside the working group. Because, of course, the real ballots of these revisions have to come to the national mirror committees, like the US TAG here, the ANSI ICAC committee. Those are the organizations that actually vote on the revision. Do they like it? Do they not like it? Do they have comments, et cetera, et cetera? Those are the votes that are going to actually drive the process. So if the working group has its next meeting in the middle end of February, and they put together a document where they feel like, okay, this is good, we're ready to have this go out to all the member bodies, all the national member committees for comment, then that they would ballot that. And that ballot traditionally or lately, that kind of an initial ballot for comment from the national member committees has lasted 8 weeks. So, and that's about as short as it can be. So if we assume that the working group meeting in February creates what's called a committee draft, then that would get balloted to the national member committees, and that would happen maybe in the April and May timeframe of 2024. That would be an 8-week ballot. So during that 8-week ballot, all the national member committees, like the ANSI ICAC here in the United States, committees comparable to that, all in countries all over the world, they are going to collect comments from those national member committees, and all the national member committees are going to send all their comments on the draft back to the working group. And there are going to be a lot of comments, because there always are. And the more widely a standard is used, the more comments are generated. And we know how widely 17020 is used, right? So I think the working group is going to have a lot of comments to wade through, and that can take some time. And so I'm projecting here that if that committee draft, the committee ballot ends like at the end of May, then it's going to take the working group June, July, and August to kind of sort through the comments. However they do that, there's no magic process. There aren't a lot of rules or structure, but the committee will figure out how to do that. And let's say they take 3 months to get that done. And what they're doing is they're considering the comments, of course, and along the way they're saying, okay, well, for the comments that we are finding persuasive and that are good ideas, well, let's make some tweaks. Let's make some changes in our draft revision to the standard. So there's a lot of comments to get through. And plus, there's some more drafting, right? There's some more revision that needs to happen. Now, if all that gets done, right, by the end of August of 2024, then the next fastest ballot would be a ballot of a draft international standard. Now, that kind of a ballot would be issued if the working group decides, okay, we got all the comments from all the national member committees, and we've considered them all, and we've seen how we want to revise the standard. How big of a change did we make to that committee draft? How big of a change did we make